In the dusty, sun-baked town of Red Hollow, life had always been measured in quiet routines and whispered fears. The town's people, simple folk with calloused hands and weathered faces, knew to steer clear of the mountain man in the cage that sat at the edge of the main street. He had arrived years ago, a giant of a man with broad shoulders and a wild beard that seemed to carry the forest itself in its tangles. Rumors swirled around him like dust in the wind. He was dangerous, they said. Violent, unpredictable, and untamable. Mothers whispered warnings to their children. Men avoided eye contact when he passed, and even the local lawmen, a grizzled sheriff with a heart of gold, shook his head in silent resignation whenever he caught sight of the massive figure pacing behind iron bars. The cage had been erected not out of cruelty but out of necessity. The mountain man, whose name no one dared speak aloud, had been caught trespassing on homesteads, breaking fences, and scaring livestock. Yet there was a mystery in his eyes that no one understood. A deep, haunted sadness that flickered for a brief second before vanishing behind the intensity of his glare. He seemed almost human, and yet, to the town he was a beast, a creature of the wilderness who had been dragged into their orderly, sun-bleached lives. And then there was the widow, Eleanor, the soft-spoken, fiercely independent woman who had lost her husband to a cruel accident in the mountains 2 years prior, had watched the man in the cage with a curiosity that bordered on obsession. She had come to Red Hollow to escape the suffocating grief that had taken residence in her heart, and she carried with her a small, modest wedding ring, a token of love now buried in memory, a relic of a past life that no longer served her. Unlike the others, she did not fear him. Instead, she felt something stirring, a strange pull that defied reason. She saw not the savage creature of the tales, but a man trapped by circumstances beyond his control, a soul caged both literally and figuratively. On the morning the story began to shift, Eleanor stood in front of the cage, the sunlight glinting off her hair, the ring catching the light as she twisted it nervously in her fingers. The town watched from a distance, murmuring among themselves. What could that woman possibly want with him? They asked. The mountain man, sensing her presence, lifted his head, and their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding, a flicker of recognition that transcended language, social norms, and fear. It was as if he had been waiting for someone who would see him not as a monster, but as a man. Eleanor, taking a deep breath, stepped closer to the cage, her heartbeat thundering in her chest like a drumbeat of fate. She had made a decision, a choice that defied the whispers, the fear, and the caution that had kept the town in a perpetual state of wary observation. She pressed her hand to the cold iron bars and said softly, almost as if confessing to herself, "I want to buy you." The words carried no mockery, no cruelty, only an offer of trust and humanity. The townspeople gasped. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Even the shopkeepers paused mid-task to witness what could only be described as madness or profound bravery. Eleanor reached into her pocket and drew forth the wedding ring, placing it gently on the bars between them. It gleamed like a promise, a token of her commitment not to a man she had lost, but to the life she intended to reclaim. The mountain man's eyes softened, the rough edges of his face giving way to a momentary vulnerability that none had seen before. He leaned toward the ring, sniffed it almost reverently, and then pressed his massive palm against Eleanor's small hand through the bars. The touch was gentle despite the size and calluses of his fingers, and in that instant the town seemed to hold its breath. This was the beginning of something no one could have predicted, a connection born not of convenience or fear or obligation, but of mutual recognition of loneliness, longing, and the desperate hope for redemption. Eleanor smiled, a small, trembling curve of her lips, and whispered, "Come with me and I will set you free." The mountain man hesitated for a long moment, his massive frame frozen in a mixture of fear, disbelief, and hope. He had spent years behind iron bars, living in the shadow of the town's whispers and the cold judgment of strangers. His life had been one of isolation, survival, and the constant reminder that he was feared, hated, and misunderstood. And yet, here was Eleanor, a woman who offered not chains or ridicule, but her hand and a piece of her heart, symbolized by the delicate gold band she had once shared with her late husband. The sun climbed higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the dusty street, and the townspeople's murmurs swelled into an anxious hum. They watched as Eleanor stood with unwavering composure, her eyes locked with his, conveying more than words ever could. In that moment, The mountain man felt a pull he could not resist, a delicate thread of trust, fragile yet unbreakable, that tethered him to this small, determined woman. His rough, calloused hand trembled as he reached through the iron bars, brushing against her palm once more. It was a tentative contact at first, testing, measuring the safety of human touch he had long believed lost to him. Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she did not flinch. She understood his fear. She had experienced loss and grief herself. She knew the courage it took to trust again, to believe in something beyond survival and despair. Slowly, the mountain man stepped back from the bars, his eyes never leaving hers, and began to lower himself to the ground as if preparing to bow to the unknown future she represented. The air seemed to hold its breath, and the dust swirled like a quiet blessing around them. Eleanor stepped closer, gently placing her hand on the cool iron once more, and spoke with a soft authority that seemed to melt the fear embedded in his being. "I will not hurt you," she said. "I only want to see you free, to see you live without chains, without fear. Come with me. There is a place where no one will judge you, where you can be yourself." His chest rose and fell rapidly, the caged life he had endured pressing against his ribs like a memory of pain, of endless waiting, and yet, for the first time in what felt like decades, a flicker of something else stirred within him. Hope. A deep, raw hope that maybe, just maybe, the world could be more than judgment and solitude. Eleanor reached into her satchel and pulled out a simple brown cloak, worn but sturdy, meant to shield him from the harsh sun and the cold nights outside the town's limits. She draped it over his shoulders carefully, her fingers brushing against his skin in a way that sent warmth through the giant man's body, warmth he had not felt in years. The townspeople gasped again, some in awe, some in disapproval, but Eleanor did not notice them. She was focused entirely on him, on the life that could begin outside the cage, where judgment and fear no longer had power. The mountain man's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the first sign of emotion the town had ever witnessed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he nodded slowly, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Eleanor's smile widened, gentle and triumphant, and she extended her hand fully. He placed his enormous, rough fingers over hers, and in that simple gesture, a pact was sealed. They stepped together toward the edge of the town, leaving behind the cage, the whispers and the fears of the townspeople. Every step was a reclamation of life, every breath a defiance of the past that had bound him. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow on their path as if blessing this first act of freedom, this first embrace of trust and the fragile beginning of love. The mountain man, once feared by all, walked beside Eleanor not as a prisoner but as a man reborn. And in his heart, a slow, steady flame of affection began to burn, intertwining with the gratitude and awe he felt toward the woman who had seen him not as a monster but as a man capable of love and devotion. As Eleanor led the mountain man out of Red Hollow, the townspeople's voices faded into the distance, leaving only the whispering wind and the soft crunch of boots against dry earth. For the first time he felt the world around him not as a prison, but as an expanse of possibilities, each one untamed and free. Eleanor had chosen a path that led into the hills beyond the town, a place she knew well where the streams ran clear and the trees formed a protective canopy over the wildflowers that bloomed in defiance of the rugged terrain. The mountain man followed closely, his massive form moving with surprising grace despite the weight of years spent confined behind bars. He glanced at Eleanor often, studying the determination in her stride, the softness in her gaze, and the courage it took to defy the judgmental eyes of Red Hollow. It was strange for him to trust, stranger still to feel a warmth in his chest that he had long believed buried under layers of solitude and fear. Eleanor noticed his glances and offered quiet encouragement, a gentle smile that said without words, "You are safe. You are not alone." That reassurance was enough to soothe the jagged edges of his soul, though old habits die hard, and the shadow of suspicion lingered in his mind. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Eleanor found a secluded spot near a bubbling brook, shielded by boulders and overhanging branches, where she decided they could rest. She set down a small pack containing simple provisions, bread, cheese, and a flask of water. The mountain man, though unused to such gentleness, accepted her offerings with gratitude, and the two of them shared the modest meal in companionable silence. Each bite, each sip of water was a ritual of trust, a mutual acknowledgement that they were no longer bound by fear, but connected by the fragile threads of something deeper, something that could grow into love. After the meal, Eleanor unrolled a blanket near the brook and gestured for him to sit. He hesitated for a moment, his instincts wary, but eventually lowered himself with surprising delicacy, careful not to crush the fabric beneath his weight. Eleanor sat beside him, her hand brushing against his as she smoothed the blanket. The contact, brief but deliberate, sent shivers through both of them, and the mountain man's gaze softened, revealing the vulnerability he had kept hidden for so long. Eleanor, sensing his unspoken tension, leaned slightly closer, offering warmth and comfort without demanding anything in return. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. "I know it's not easy to trust after what you've been through." He exhaled, a low, rumbling sound that carried relief, exhaustion, and the first glimmers of hope all at once. His massive shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in memory, he allowed himself to imagine a life unshackled from fear and judgment. As twilight deepened, the air cooling and the stars beginning to peek through the fading light, Eleanor shared stories of her past, of the love she had lost, of the hardships that had shaped her, and of the dreams she still harbored. The mountain man listened intently, fascinated by her courage and resilience, and in turn, began to share fragments of his own history, fragments he had never dared speak aloud. Tales of wandering the mountains, of survival against nature's harshness, and of moments of profound loneliness. Each revelation drew them closer, binding them with threads of empathy, understanding, and mutual respect. By the time the moon rose high above the trees, casting silver light across the brook, an unspoken bond had solidified between them, a promise that, though the world might fear or misunderstand him, here and now with Eleanor he had found acceptance, connection, and the first sparks of a love that could heal even the deepest wounds. The mountain man reached out tentatively at first and took Eleanor's hand in both of his. She did not pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his, anchoring him to this newfound sense of belonging. Their hearts, beating at different rhythms yet somehow harmonizing, spoke a language neither needed to define. The world beyond the trees ceased to matter. For the first time he realized that freedom was not only the absence of chains, but the presence of someone willing to see him as he truly was. And Eleanor, with her quiet bravery, had given him both. The night air wrapped around them like a protective shroud, and as the brook babbled softly nearby, the mountain man rested his head slightly against her shoulder, savoring the gentle human connection that had long eluded him. The stars above witnessed the beginning of a romance that promised warmth, healing, and the defiance of fear. In the heart of the wilderness, away from judgment and whispers, a new chapter unfolded for the man once feared by all, and the widow who had dared to see him as more than a legend of terror. A chapter written with trust, tenderness, and the first strokes of love's enduring light. The days that followed were a delicate dance of discovery, trust, and the slow unraveling of old fears. Eleanor and the mountain man, who she now called Thomas, a name she had gleaned from a fragment of memory he had once whispered, wandered through the hills and forests surrounding Red Hollow. Every step they took together revealed a world both harsh and beautiful, a wilderness that mirrored the complexities of their hearts. Thomas, whose life had been dictated by survival and solitude, began to understand the strange, comforting rhythm of companionship. He learned to anticipate Eleanor's movements, to sense when she needed a moment of quiet reflection, or when a laugh might lighten her burdens. And Eleanor, in turn, discovered the depth of gentleness beneath his imposing exterior, the way his large hands could cradle a wildflower as tenderly as he now held hers. Each night, as they set up a small camp beneath the stars, they shared their stories, dreams, and unspoken fears. Eleanor spoke of her late husband with fondness and sorrow, of the love she had known and the courage it had taken to survive after losing him. Thomas, though initially reluctant, shared tales of a life spent in the shadow of the mountains, of times when he had longed for connection but had been driven away by fear, both his own and that of others. Their conversations were sometimes punctuated by laughter, sometimes by silence, but always by a growing sense of intimacy that neither had anticipated. Slowly, Thomas began to shed the armor of mistrust he had worn for so many years, revealing a man capable of tenderness, humor, and fierce loyalty. Eleanor noticed the subtle changes, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the careful attention he paid to her comfort, the quiet pride he felt in guiding her safely through the rugged terrain. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, casting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Eleanor found Thomas staring at the horizon, lost in thought. She approached quietly and he turned to her, a small, hesitant smile on his lips. "I never thought I'd feel like this," he admitted, his deep voice tinged with vulnerability. "I never believed anyone could see me. Not the man behind the fear, but me." Eleanor reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, the warmth of their touch speaking volumes. "I see you," she said simply. "I see everything you are, Thomas. The man you've been, the man you are, and the man you're becoming, and I want to be a part of that journey." He pulled her close, wrapping his large arms around her, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel truly safe, truly loved. The mountains around them seemed to lean in, the whispering pines and gentle breeze bearing witness to the unspoken promises forming between them. But their journey was not without its challenges. Red Hollow was not a town to easily forgive or forget, and the whispers of their absence began to reach the ears of those who had once feared Thomas. Some came to the edge of the hills, watching from a distance, questioning Eleanor's judgment, warning her of danger and murmuring that the mountain man was unfit for human company. Yet Eleanor stood firm, her resolve unwavering. She had made a choice, and she would not allow fear or prejudice to dictate the course of their hearts. Thomas, inspired by her courage and love, began to stand taller, not with arrogance, but with the quiet dignity of a man reclaiming his life. He faced the whispers and the stares not with aggression, but with calm confidence, and slowly the tale of the mountain man began to shift. The townspeople, witnessing the transformation, began to see that Eleanor had not been foolish. The man they had feared was, in truth, gentle, protective, and devoted, qualities that no amount of rumor could diminish. And amidst this shifting landscape of perception, Eleanor and Thomas found joy in the simplest of things, sharing meals by the brook, laughing under the stars, exploring hidden groves, and savoring the quiet intimacy of holding one another as the world slept around them. Each day strengthened the bond between them, a bond forged not by convenience or obligation, but by a mutual understanding of loneliness, hope, and the quiet magic of love discovered against all odds. By the time autumn began to paint the hills in fiery shades of orange and red, Thomas and Eleanor had not only found each other, but had built a sanctuary of trust and passion where love could flourish, free from fear, free from judgment, and alive with the promise of a future written together. By the time winter's first frost kissed the hills of the wilderness, Thomas and Eleanor had fully embraced the life they had carved together, a life built on trust, courage, and the quiet power of love. They had transformed a simple clearing near the brook into a home, modest but full of warmth and laughter, with handmade furnishings and the subtle beauty of the wild woven into every corner. Thomas had learned not only the ways of the mountains but also the gentleness of shared existence, tending a small garden, chopping firewood, and preparing meals with care and pride, always glancing at Eleanor with a quiet smile that spoke of devotion deeper than words could convey. Eleanor, in turn, found joy in the rhythm of their days together, the soft murmur of the brook in the mornings, the thrill of exploring the forest, and the comfort of evenings spent wrapped in each other's arms by the firelight. Their love had blossomed in the most unexpected of places, a union of contrasts, her delicate elegance and his rugged strength, her careful thoughtfulness and his spontaneous courage, blending seamlessly into a shared life of harmony and deep emotional intimacy. One crisp evening, under a sky glittering with stars, Thomas surprised Eleanor by kneeling on one knee in the snow-covered clearing, a small, carefully polished rock in his hands, engraved with simple markings that he had painstakingly carved himself. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "you saw me when no one else could. You gave me freedom, love, and a chance to be more than a legend of fear. Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming joy of being understood, cherished, and chosen in a world that had once seemed hostile and lonely. She laughed softly, her hand slipping into his as she whispered, "Yes, Thomas, yes, I will." The mountain man's smile lit up the clearing brighter than the moonlight, and he lifted her into his arms, holding her close as the cold air of winter seemed to vanish in the warmth of their embrace. The forest around them, silent witness to the journey of two souls, seemed to exhale in gentle approval, the pines swaying as if in celebration, and the brook sparkling like liquid silver in the moonlight. Word of their union eventually reached Red Hollow, and the town, once filled with whispers of fear and caution, began to see Thomas not as a monster, but as a man capable of love, tenderness, and remarkable courage. Eleanor and Thomas did not return as saviors seeking approval, but as a couple whose love had endured trials and misunderstanding, a living testament to the power of trust and the courage to see beyond fear. Together they built a life full of laughter, warmth, and endless discovery. They danced under the stars, shared quiet meals by the fire, explored hidden valleys and waterfalls, and faced the challenges of life in the wilderness hand in hand. In each other, they found sanctuary, passion, and companionship deeper than either had ever known. And as years passed, their love only grew stronger, tempered by trust and nourished by the unbreakable bond forged when Eleanor had first seen the man behind the cage. The mountain man, once feared by all, became a legend of a different sort. A man redeemed not through fear or force, but through love, understanding, and the unwavering courage of a widow who dared to see his heart. Together, Thomas and Eleanor lived a life of joy, adventure, and romance, proving that even the loneliest souls could find love, freedom, and happiness when one brave heart chose to believe in another. Their story, whispered in the winds that swept the mountains, became a tale of hope for generations to come, that love can transform fear into courage, loneliness into companionship, and life into a shared, radiant adventure that shines brighter than any shadow of doubt or past suffering. And so, beneath the canopy of stars, with the mountains as their home and each other as their anchor, Thomas and Eleanor embraced their forever, a happy ending born of trust, bravery, and the enduring magic of love discovered against all odds.